visual static. Dark hum. Dim light flickers across an old photograph. A whisper. You were never supposed to know this. They told you family is sacred, that blood is thicker than water. But what they didn't tell you is that sometimes blood conceals something ancient, something rotten. Secrets don't just stain family trees, they poison the roots. And for some families, darkness isn't an accident. It's an inheritance. You've felt it, haven't you? That unease at the dinner table, the things no one talks about, the room in the house you were never allowed to enter. Today, we open the door. These are not ghost stories. These are real accounts, whispered through generations, buried under silence, and finally clawing their way into the light. In this volume, 3 twisted family secrets will take you into the heart of generational evil. They start like memories, end like nightmares. But understand this, every story you're about to hear has one thing in common: a lie told by someone who said they loved you. You may never look at your own family the same way again. You've been warned. Let's begin with the first descent, the story of a man who believed his uncle died in an accident, only to uncover a trail of murder, psychological collapse, and institutional cover-up that had been engineered to protect something far worse than guilt. Remember this feeling, the tightening in your chest, the suspicion in your bones. Because after this, you'll start to see the world for what it really is. A place where truth isn't hidden. It's sealed. And every seal is there to keep you obedient, blind, and safe from knowledge that could change you forever. You want the truth? Then earn it. Listen. Absorb. And do not look away. If you're still here, you're already changing. Welcome to Volume 5. Welcome to the truths your family died to keep buried. He was 7 when it happened. Young enough to forget, but just old enough to remember what he was told. The memory, a beach trip, his brother, his parents, the warm wind in his hair. But something was off. The air wasn't just salty. It was tense. His parents whispered when they thought the boys couldn't hear. Their smiles were brittle, forced, and Uncle Ray wasn't there. They said he was busy. They'd see him another time. The next day, they sat him down. They didn't even cry. They just said Ray had been in a car accident, that he was now in heaven, but decades later, something cracks open. He's older now, returning home with his girlfriend. The route takes them past a specific stretch of the PCH, and as they drive, she grows quiet, haunted. He asks what's wrong, and she shares a story her mom once told her, a dark one. A friend, someone named Nina, who disappeared. Her body found dismembered, wrapped in plastic. The man she was with, dead, killed in what looked like a suicide crash. The moment she says Nina's name, he feels something unravel inside, like something in his memory just moved. A stone rolled back to reveal rot beneath. Nina, Uncle Ray's girlfriend. He asks, voice trembling, if she remembers the boyfriend's name. She says, it was something like Ron or Rye. He stares straight ahead, cold washing over him like the tide swallowing sandcastles. Was it Ray? He asks. She turns sharply. Yes, that's it. Ray. There are no coincidences when it comes to family, only cover-ups. He pulls over, calls his father, and what his father says next confirms it all. Come by the house tomorrow. I'll explain everything. There's a moment in every man's life where everything he believed about his childhood fractures. That moment when the illusion dies. That night, he barely sleeps. He dreams of coffins in garages, of secrets stuffed in trunks. And when Mo knows. Morning comes. He drives down to the house where everything once seemed normal. But normal is the first lie every dark family tells. This is where the real story begins. The house feels smaller than he remembers, like the weight of what's about to be said is pulling the walls in closer. His mother meets him at the door, tears already falling. No words, just a long, shaking hug. His father's inside, sitting in the same recliner he'd always seen him in. But today, he doesn't look like a man. He looks like a vault, about to break. He doesn't sit. He doesn't breathe. He just asks, "Was it really an accident?" His father doesn't lie. He nods slowly. No, it wasn't. And just like that, the illusion dies. They tell him everything about the weekend trip Ray took with Nina, about the cabin tucked away in the redwoods, one of 5 in a secluded stretch of forest. Normally, those cabins were always full. Tourists, families, campers. But that weekend, every other cabin, empty. No one else, no noise, just Ray, Nina, and something that drove him into madness. He called his brother, this man's father, ranting, incoherent, not screaming, but speaking in broken, fragmented nonsense. Words that didn't belong together. Sentences that didn't track. It was like something had short-circuited his mind. Then he hung up. By the time police found the car, Nina was in the trunk, her body dismembered and wrapped with surgical precision. Ray was in the front seat, neck snapped, no seatbelt, no survivors, no explanations, just carnage. The official report said it was a murder-suicide, but even the detectives didn't believe that fully. You see, the crime scene didn't make sense. There was no sign of a struggle, no blood in the car, no hesitation marks, no note, but most chilling of all, no history of violence. Ray was loved, known, stable. He wasn't the kind of man who would do this. Unless something, or someone, had broken him. His father's voice cracks for the first time as he says it. I knew something got to him. I just didn't know what. This is what happens when you dig into forbidden history. The facts don't just disturb you. They destabilize reality. Make you question what kind of world would allow this. But the story doesn't end with the murder. That was only the event. The real story is what happened in that cabin, and why no one, not police, not family, not government investigators, ever tried to find out who else might have been there. Because deep in those redwoods, something watched, and what it whispered into Ray's ear that night didn't just kill him. It infected the bloodline. He drives back up the highway, ears ringing with the confession. But the road itself feels hostile, like every mile marker is an accusation. Sleep evades him, so at dawn, he does the one thing no sane person would. He pulls the police file from a forgotten attic box and reads it cover to cover. Something jumps out. A single stray note from a rookie deputy. All 4 neighboring cabins vacant. Owner claims a government group paid cash to block the bookings. No follow-up, no signature. Just, that's where the real rot begins to show. 30 years earlier, during the last gasp of America's clandestine mind control era, a shell corporation called Eris, Advanced Research in Isolation Studies, leased remote properties to test behavioral stressors. Most records were shredded in '93, but fragments survived in South Bay Courthouse archives. Sonic exposure trials, sensory deprivation diets, disinformation loops pumped through hidden speakers. The subjects, volunteers, they said, but volunteers don't leave dismembered and wrapped in clinical plastic. Ray was never meant to be there. A civilian booking error placed two lovers inside an experiment designed to fracture already fragile psyches. And when the hidden transmitters triggered, Ray splintered. The program succeeded in the worst possible sense. He pictures his uncle, hands trembling, hearing voices that no one else could hear. A droning frequency beneath the wind, spliced with whispers repeating a single imperative. Divide, disassemble, dispose. Nina never stood a chance. Neither did Ray's sanity. And the infection didn't stop at the tree line. His father's hollowed stare, his mother's chronic insomnia, his own nightmares. They're all echo cascades, psychological shrapnel from Eris's buried tech still humming somewhere in the subconscious. Trauma handed down like heirloom silver, sharpening each generation. This, he realizes, is institutional manipulation at its purest. Create the monster, let the public bury the evidence, then pivot to the next test site. Families become data points. Grief becomes collateral. And the past is only safe because no one bothers to exhume it. But he's done being collateral. Tomorrow, he drives north, back to the cabin, back to where the frequency lives. Because if corruption hides in the pines, he will tear out the roots and make them howl. And for the first time since childhood, he feels something primal, not fear, not grief, revolution. The experimenters has wrote the script. He intends to rewrite the ending himself, permanently. Night swallows the highway as he turns off onto a forgotten timber road, the same gravel path Ray logged in a rental ledger 3 decades ago. Pines crowd the headlights, branches knitting overhead like conspirators hiding the sky. Every instinct screams to stop, but momentum is hunger now. Curiosity has become rebellion. He reaches the gate. Rusted chain, rotted sign, private property, no trespass. The lock snaps with one decisive crowbar swing. That sound, iron surrendering, is the point of no return. The cabins loom like coffins propped on stilts, windows black, doors buckled, roofs sagging. He kills the engine. Silence spills out, too complete, like sound itself has been evacuated. Phone loses signal. He expected that. Eris wouldn't leave RF interference to chance. He pockets a portable recorder anyway. Evidence matters, if he lives to show it. Inside cabin 5, dust lies thick as snowfall. Furniture cloaked in stained sheets. A thermos rusted shut on the mantel. But the real prize is beneath the floorboards. Faint circular burn marks. Remnants of bolted-down hardware long removed. He measures spacing with his flashlight. Pairs match the schematics from those shredded Eris blueprints. This was the speaker grid that bathed Ray's mind in weaponized whispers. A warped closet door resists, then groans open. Behind old coats sits a metal strongbox, government gray, stenciled, return to SB7. 3 decades of forest damp haven't cracked it, but time teaches leverage. With a pry bar and adrenaline, the lid wrenches free. Inside, 3 items. A reel-to-reel tape labeled Session 12 Compliance Cascade. A Polaroid of Ray and Nina laughing on the cabin porch, and a memorandum stamped Top Secret. If subject exhibits dissociative violence, initiate burn protocol and sanitize site within 48 hours. Burn protocol never happened. Budget cuts, maybe. Bureaucracy left the horror in Taz, gate for him to find. He feels the ground tilt, rage and dread in equal measure. Ray wasn't a casualty of madness. He was data. Nina was collateral, and every pair of eyes that should have cared signed the bottom line instead. He pockets the memo. Wind howls through a broken pane, vibrating teeth, tightening the skull, like the tape is still playing somewhere beneath the earth. He whispers to the shadows, voice steady, commander cold. I'm not leaving until you answer for this. The cabin seems to breathe back. The hunt has officially begun. Section 6. Midnight. The forest stands still, unnaturally so. No crickets, no rustle, no owls. Only that hum, low and rhythmic, like a machine buried beneath layers of rot and soil. He knows now, the Eris installation wasn't just in the cabin. It is the land. The trees, the power grid remnants, the underground vaults they never dismantled. And whatever frequency Ray heard that pushed him past human limits, it's still live, still bleeding into the air like psychic radiation. He crouches in the basement, where the insulation's peeled back, exposing a sealed trapdoor. Concrete and iron, scorched along the edges. He places his palm to the surface. Warm. Something below is running. He pries the hatch open. The tunnel descends 40 feet. He climbs down, rung by rusted rung. No lights. The flashlight cuts a pale spear through blackness. At the bottom, a corridor of corroded steel and industrial rot. Faded warning stencils on the walls. Sub-level 3. Psychometric isolation. He whispers, not out of fear, but reverence. How many lives were erased down here, so theirs could go untouched up there? The hallway ends at a reinforced vault door, ajar. He pushes. It groans open into a chamber built like a tomb. No windows, just white walls and a single chair bolted to the center, stained dark. Restraints frayed, speaker cones embedded in every surface, and in the far corner, another tape deck, blinking red. Stand by. He presses play. The voice that fills the room is calm, clipped, official. Session 12. Subject displayed further detachment after auditory layering increased to 27 Hz. Delusional content intensified. Hostile ideation confirmed. Then Ray's voice, shaking, cracked. She's not real. She's not real. You made her say it. You put her in me. She's inside. Static. Then silence. He turns to the camera mounted on the ceiling. Still red. Still live. They're watching, he says aloud. They never stopped watching. The old instincts flood in. He moves quickly, grabs the tape, photographs the walls, pockets a handful of scorched files from a broken filing cabinet. Then he does the one thing the program never accounted for. He speaks directly to the lens, eyes locked. You built this place to study fear, but now fear's found you. I'm dragging this secret into the light, brick by brick, body by body. You want silence? I'll give you the opposite. He leaves the vault and slams the door behind him. The rabbit hole just bottomed out, and he's still falling. 7. When he emerged from that decaying labyrinth, the air above ground felt thinner, like something ancient had been disturbed. He stood at the edge of the forest, tape recorder still clutched in hand, heart pounding, not just from fear, but from clarity. He now understood. This wasn't about Uncle Ray. Not anymore. Ray was collateral. The true horror wasn't in what Ray did, but what was done to him. And yet, even now, something in him resisted speaking it aloud. That same trained silence that exists in all families cursed with generational secrets. You feel it. That quiet code. We don't talk about this. Not at church. Not at dinner. Not ever. He drives all night. The passenger seat as headlights cut through the mountain fog. He replays Ray's voice, hearing it differently now. Not madness, but programming. Not chaos, but drama engineered to implode. He remembers what his father said before hanging up. "Come tomorrow, I'll explain everything." But he never truly did he? Not everything, not this. So he goes to the old sheriff instead, the man who first investigated Ray's death, retired now, living in a trailer near the cliffs. The sheriff opens the door, sees the man's face, and says only one thing. "You finally found it, didn't you?" He nods. Inside, the sheriff pulls out a metal case. Inside, old evidence sealed in plastic, photos, reports, handwritten memos with red stamps, restricted, unauthorized copy, return to military intake, Sector 9. The sheriff points to one black and white photo. That's the cabin before it was sold to Ray, before the public knew it existed. What you don't know is who built it. A man named Dr. Saul Vellum, MK Ultra dropout. Government cut him loose in 72, but he didn't stop. He pours whiskey, offers a glass. "You ever hear of theta triggering?" the sheriff asks. "It's when they implant trauma during early sleep cycles, while the subject's in theta brainwave state. Combine that with frequency exposure, isolation, and scripted hallucinations. You can turn a man's memory into a minefield." He lights a cigarette. His hands tremble. "They were training sleeper assets, boy. Not in labs. In families. Right here. In America." The man says nothing. Because somewhere deep inside, he already knew. The truth isn't buried. It's installed. And it's active. Dad. Section 8. There are moments in life when the truth doesn't hit like a lightning bolt. No. It seeps in like poison. Quiet, slow, unstoppable. That night, he sat alone in a motel room. The sheriff's files spread across the bed like the relics of a buried civilization. Photographs of men with their eyes blacked out. Diagrams of a cabin's foundation with strange runes etched into the concrete. A transcript marked "Sleep Study, Unsanctioned, Subject Ray." His uncle wasn't crazy. He was compromised. It turns out Ray had volunteered, sort of, years ago, back when he was still in college. He signed up for a behavioral psychology experiment under a professor with ties to something called the program. He'd laughed about it in his old journal. They wired me up, blasted tones in my ears, made me look at strobe lights while I was half asleep. Said it was for science, but science has a shadow. And in the shadows, research turns into ritual. One folder, stamped with the seal of a defunct agency, detailed something called Operation Quiet Seed. The directive: embed latent psychological triggers in unwitting subjects. Activate them years, sometimes decades, later using symbols, smells, or sounds. Ray had been one of those seeds. And the trigger, it wasn't random. It was Nina. Her voice, her smell, her presence. It matched a prototype conditioning model they'd used during Ray's sessions. Somehow, the two became entangled. The memory of her activated a failsafe, one that turned love into rage, intimacy into execution. But here's the most chilling part. Ray didn't know, not until it was too late. And even then, he wasn't sure whether he had truly done it, or whether his body had acted without his soul. That final phone call to Dad, the panicked rambling, it wasn't madness, it was Ray, waking up inside the machinery of a man who no longer belonged to himself. And just like that, you understand, this isn't about one family. It's about how the system buries seeds in all of us, through trauma, through control, through obedience disguised as love. And now, you begin to wonder, how many of your own memories aren't really yours at all? Keep watching. The rabbit hole hasn't even begun to show its teeth. Section 9. There's a reason the elite love secrets. Not just to hide things. No, that's too obvious. They love them because secrets are power. Because what you don't know can still shape what you fear. And fear, that's the first lock on the human mind. That night, the man burns the motel lamp until sunrise, going over every scrap of his uncle's history. Photographs, military receipts, prescription records tied to drugs that don't exist in any database. One file marked MEMAs for controlled dissociation. Sealed, unused, like it was left there for someone to find. Ray wasn't the only one. Inside the sheriff's files is a second case, dated 3 years earlier. Different name. Same M.O. man retreats to a rural property with a woman. Dies in a crash. Woman found dismembered. Official ruling. Murder-suicide due to psychotic break. But the deeper pattern is undeniable. Same location. Same trigger cues. Same hollowed-out expression in the man's final photo. Like something ancient was looking through him. And now it starts to click. It wasn't just Ray that was programmed. It was the cabin itself. The structure was a reactivation site, a pressure chamber for the psyche, designed with audio loops built into the walls, directional infrasound generators buried in the foundation, and something worse, a crawlspace room sealed off behind a false wall. In it, a chair bolted to the floor, shackles, speakers, and a mirror with a microphone behind it. Ray had never mentioned that room, but his screams were recorded there. The timestamp matched the night Nina died. The cabin was a stage, a dark theater of psychological collapse, and the actors, chosen, not random. What if your family wasn't cursed, but targeted? What if the tragedy passed down through blood wasn't natural, but installed? You were told it was mental illness. You were told it was bad. Genes. But what if your father's rage, your uncle's breakdown, your brother's silence weren't inherited? They were engineered. The man closes the final folder. By now the sky is light, but it feels like night, like the sun can't reach the part of him that was just altered. He whispers, "They didn't just kill Nina. They programmed the murder." And what happens when those programs are still running inside other men, inside you? You're not afraid. You're awake now, but you should be afraid of what comes next. Section 10. You were never supposed to see the blueprint, not the one for the cabin or the mind. But now that you have, now that you know, there's no going back. You've stepped across a threshold, brother, and like every man who's walked into the dark to find what's been hiding, you've been marked. Because here's the truth that burns clean through illusion. Families aren't born twisted. They're twisted on purpose. The story of Uncle Ray wasn't a fluke. It wasn't madness. It was a cycle, a pattern hidden inside generations. And that pattern, it's everywhere. Take a breath. Now, feel how deep the programming goes. Remember when you were told to never talk about that uncle, when certain rooms were always locked, when Grandma's eyes got cold whenever you asked who your real grandfather was? That wasn't shame. That was design. Secrets become sutures, tight enough to keep a bloodline stitched together, even when it's rotting from the inside. And the real infection abuser, worship your ancestor, and carry the burden of guilt like it's your inheritance. This is how dynasties are controlled, not with chains, with myths. And if the men in your family ever felt like time bombs, drinking themselves into numbness, raging at shadows, disappearing into their own minds, understand that wasn't just personal failure. It was the system working exactly as designed. Because the world's most powerful institutions aren't built on truth. They're built on repetition. Trauma passed down like scripture, taught in churches, implied in schools, etched into laws written by men who never had to bleed for them. And what happens to those who break the pattern? What happens when a man starts digging? He's labeled unstable, dangerous, a threat to the family legacy, just like Ray. But you're not unstable. You're not broken. You're becoming what they fear most. A man who remembers what was buried. And if you've made it this far, prove you're one of us. Comment. The blood remembers. Comment it again. The blood remembers. Let the algorithm carry your signal. Let other men find you in the dark. You're not alone anymore. Now we go deeper. Section 11. The blood remembers. But so do the walls. In 2002, 3 counties away from that cursed cabin, a property developer bought an abandoned psychiatric hospital slated for demolition. While surveying the grounds, his team unearthed an old ledger sealed in a rusted filing cabinet, locked inside a bricked-off records room. The entries were handwritten. No carbon copies. No digital backups. The ledger detailed a program, Opus Virgo, targeting emotionally malleable bloodlines for long-term psychological experiments in generational trauma. The patients, entire families. The methods, controlled stress induction, environmental manipulation, trauma bonding, auditory and visual triggering, all recorded under the guise of therapy. But what made this discovery more than historical horror was that one of the families listed was Ray's. It went back 4 generations. A great-grandfather institutionalized after a hunting accident left his cousin dismembered. A grandfather who disappeared for 5 years and returned mute, claiming he'd seen the mechanism of the soul. Then Ray. Then the crash. Then you. These weren't isolated incidents. They were installments in a program. And you were the next test subject. You weren't born broken. You were targeted before birth. That dream you keep having, the one where the room stretches, the ceiling hums, and your mother is crying but her mouth won't open, that wasn't a nightmare. That was memory. Implanted, repressed, activated. You never got sick. You were triggered. And now that the program knows you're waking up, it's going to try to pull you back in. Through familiar voices, through feelings that aren't yours, through guilt that doesn't belong to you. They'll tell you it's anxiety, trauma, genetics, but it's not. It's conditioning. Understand this. You are dangerous now, not because of what you know, but because you might act on it, might find the others, might tear down the silence they worked generations to build. But to do that, you must remember fully, not just what they did, but why they did it. The truth is buried in the bloodline, and if you keep digging, you'll find something older than trauma. You'll find a ritual. Section 12. There's a reason the ritual always begins in silence. Because silence is consent, not verbal, not conscious, but ancestral. And every family with secrets real secrets, the kind you can feel in your bones, has performed rituals without even realizing it. Unspoken rules, forbidden rooms, mysterious heirlooms passed down without question. But the older the bloodline, the more deliberate it becomes. Ray's family wasn't just dysfunctional, they were initiated. Not in some Hollywood-style satanic circle, but through an older rite, one practiced for centuries under 1,000 different names. The folding, the veil, the hollow birthright, and the purpose of the ritual, to make sure someone in each generation becomes the vessel, the sacrifice, the carrier of memory, pain, and control. Ray cracked under it. You nearly did. But here's the terrifying part. Every family has one. Not always a murderer, not always a madman, but always a carrier. And they're chosen young, marked by odd behavior, night terrors, sudden nosebleeds, a distant stare when the room gets too quiet. Ever notice how your parents watched you more closely than your siblings? Ever wonder why you had that dream every time you slept in Grandma's house? Those weren't quirks. They were signals. The carrier is groomed, fed certain stories, taught obedience to emotionless authority until their mind becomes pliable. Then, the real training begins. Isolation, reward withheld, affection rationed, pressure applied in cycles, until eventually, the carrier becomes the keeper, the one who guards the story by living it, the one who repeats the pattern, often without even knowing. It's how ancient families protect secrets without writing a single word. The ritual is psychological, invisible, hereditary, but here's the glitch in their system. You spoke. You broke the silence. You confronted the story. You dared to ask, why did Ray die like that? And once that question is asked, the ritual begins to unravel. You're not just breaking a curse. You're becoming the first man in your bloodline to rewrite it. But they won't let you go that easily, because every keeper who escapes becomes a threat to the entire design. And the deeper you go, the more you'll see what they're truly hiding. The origin of the blood ritual itself. Section 13. The origin was never about madness. It was about obedience. You've been told stories about ancestral curses, blood feuds, tragic destinies, fairy tales meant to romanticize what was really a system of psychological control. But the truth is far colder. What we now call dark family secrets were once the operational mechanisms of hidden institutions, ancient power networks that operated under names like the Order of Silent Ash, the Thorned Circle, or the Heirs of the Veil. They didn't worship demons. They manufactured gods by turning men into monsters and monsters into myths. These families were tasked with housing trauma, breeding it, cultivating it, because the pain didn't just stay in the house, it echoed, it fed something. The experiments were never isolated, they were patterned, controlled, studied. You think Ray snapped? No, Ray was activated. That phone call he made, the one your father couldn't understand, just jumbled words, panic, static, wasn't gibberish. It was a code. One passed down through disjointed phrases, scrambled sleep talk, and ritual phrases whispered to children in moments of crisis. You heard versions of it too. Remember when your grandfather said, "If the water's black, you don't come back." Or when your mother used to sing that lullaby about the man who waits behind the door. Not nursery rhymes. Warnings. You've been raised inside a labyrinth of symbols, Loss. The doors open. Not literal ones. Cognitive ones. Ray wasn't running from guilt. He was trying to outrun the past pattern. The program. The ritual written in blood and silence. And he failed. But you're starting to remember. You're pulling the veil back. You're asking the right questions. And that's when they come. Not the family. The keepers. The ones who make sure the pattern never dies. You'll feel them first. In dreams. In flickers of deja vu. In faces of strangers who feel too familiar. Because they've been watching your line for centuries. And now that you're speaking, they know you've broken the pact. Chapter Section 14. You ever wonder why it always starts with a car crash? Or a cabin in the woods? Or some remote place where help never arrives? That's not coincidence. That's old ritual architecture. Every sacrifice needs a setting, a liminal zone, where time slows, the air feels heavier, and the old rules can bleed back in. Think of Ray. Think of that cabin. 4 other rentals, fully booked year-round. Yet, for 1 weekend only, empty. That's not poor scheduling. That's a design. Silence, isolation, no witnesses, the perfect container for a breakdown or a possession. Because whatever entered that cabin with Ray and Nina wasn't just rage or madness, it was ancestral. And here's what your father never told the police. That night, Ray didn't just rant on the phone. He repeated something, over and over. A phrase your father still hears in dreams, though he'll never admit it out loud. She saw it in me. She saw it. She knew. Knew what? That Ray had been carrying something. Not just secrets, but infection. Not a virus of the body, but a virus of the mind. A generational parasite, passed through stories, abuse, silence, fear. A thing so old and embedded in the male psyche of certain bloodlines that it becomes indistinguishable from their own thoughts. We have a word for that now. Possession. But ancient families had another word. Inheritance. It wasn't about money. It was about who would carry the shadow, the chosen one, the scapegoat, the vessel. Ray was supposed to contain it. But Nina saw too much, and once the carrier is exposed, the only way to keep the ritual alive is to destroy the witness. You think it was murder? It was containment. Think about every unexplained family tragedy you've ever heard. A father kills his children, then himself. A son disappears into the mountains, never return. A ma then drives into the ocean at midnight with no note, no reason. They're not random. They're ash ritual echoes. Failures to complete the pattern cleanly. But you were never meant to know this. Yet here you are, watching still. So if you've made it this far, pause now and comment. The shadow ends with me. Twice below. Not just for the algorithm, but to mark the moment you refused to carry the darkness any further. You've been chosen for something else now, something far more dangerous and infinitely more important. That Section 16. They told you to honor your ancestors, but what if your ancestors were the architects of your prison? Because in story 2, what looked like desperation was something much deeper. Programming. A man becomes a father, and overnight, the strings tighten. He's told to provide, protect, succeed. But what he's not told is that the system has already written his script. Your father, your grandfather, your great-grandfather sealed. Because that offer wasn't an accident. It was an bait. And Muzzy, he wasn't the mastermind. He was another pawn. A disposable mouthpiece used by something ancient, something that lives at the edge of poverty and ambition. They dangle power in front of the powerless, and when they take the bait, they own you, your name, your future, your soul. That's why your father changed overnight. He didn't just get scared, he got initiated. And that boat in Spain, it wasn't just a crime scene, it was a ritual site. He thought he was making one deal, but really, he was signing a blood contract. And when that contract was broken, when Muzzy was tortured and discarded like trash, the debt fell not on just your father, but his bloodline, you, because blood doesn't forget. It echoes, it obeys. And now, you're the one with questions. You're the one wondering what your father saw before he died. You're the one wondering what's buried in your last name that no one talks about. You want the truth. Look deeper. Every man in your family was taught the same lie. You're the first to fall. But that's not true. You're just the next. Unless you break the cycle. Unless you pull the thread. No matter what unravels. Because if you don't, you already know how this ends. Dad, there's something they never teach you about legacy. It's not just the house, or the name, or the old photographs with fake smiles and haunted eyes. Legacy is a weapon, and in families like yours, like mine, it's used to keep the truth buried under layers of ritual, trauma, and debt. Your father didn't just die. He was claimed by a network older than any cartel, older than any government, a bloodline economy, where flesh is currency, silence is loyalty, and betrayal is the only way out. That's why after your father disappeared, the police didn't just close the file. They searched the house because they knew, not consciously, but deep down, they'd seen this before. A man gets in too deep, gets burned, and leaves behind a pregnant woman and a haunted home. You think your story is rare? No, it's replicated. Hundreds of men, same profile, same ambition, same end. And those bags of cocaine weren't just drugs, they were lures to pull good men into ritual failure. Because that's how the system works. Step 1, make you believe you're choosing. Step 2, offer you escape. Step 3, watch you drown trying to take it. And those Turkish men who tracked him down, they weren't just smugglers. They were enforcers. Keepers of a hidden world, where power flows through pain and betrayal, is punished with silence. Your dad broke the code, not the law. That's why they didn't care about the cash. That's why they didn't just kill him quietly. They made it messy, public, because every ritual needs witnesses. Even if they don't realize what they saw, but now, you know. Now the echo lives inside you. You carry his blood, and with it, the debt. The only way out is truth. So ask yourself, what are you willing to risk to free yourself from the chains your father wrapped around you? Because if you stay silent, you're not escaping the curse. You're becoming it. Section 18. You weren't just born into a family. You were born into a contract. Invisible, unspoken, but binding in blood. The house you grew up in, that wasn't just a home. It was the stage. A carefully curated set, designed to keep you believing everything was fine. But the truth was leaking through the cracks. Your father's fake smile, your mother's brave face, the silences that felt heavier than shouting. And when the truth finally came out, it didn't come like a thunderclap. It came like a sickness. Slow, paralyzing, infectious. You learned your father wasn't a victim of the sea, but a failed initiate. A man who made a deal with the devil and lost everything because he underestimated the cost. He thought he was scamming the system, but he was playing against something that had written the rules centuries ago. He died believing he'd failed his family, but what he didn't realize is that he never had a chance, because this system, this machine that feeds off men like him, ambitious, desperate, loyal to the bone, was designed to consume him from the start. That's why the story repeated. That's why the legacy was passed on. Not as glory, but as a wound. You were never meant to rise. You were meant to carry the shame, to inherit the guilt of a father you never met, to grow up wondering why your roots felt like chains, to carry the debt of blood you never spilled. But here's the truth. No one dares speak. What you inherit, you can bottom break. Not through denial, not through forgetting, but by stepping into the darkness and dragging the truth into the light. You weren't born to continue the curse. You were born to end it. But it will cost you comfort, security, even love. Because the moment you choose truth over legacy, you become the enemy of the very blood that raised you. And yet, if you don't, you already know what waits for you. Silence, repetition, and eventually, oblivion. Choose